Welcome to Music Career Therapy. This is our 8th episode. Today's guest is Benton James, who is co-CEO of Icons and Giants. Thanks for joining us, Benton.
No problemo, man. Good to see you, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. So we're going to jump right in because you do a lot of things, and I think we'll probably not be able to get to all of it, but I'm really interested in hearing both your background as well as all the stuff you're currently working on. So you are co-CEO of Icons and Giants. Can you talk about how that company started and what you guys do?
Well, I think many people, it was a COVID thing. So Billy and I, and Billy Mann is my partner on it. He and I had been working together professionally for almost 10 years now, but we were also really close friends. And right before we went into lockdown, I was working at Red Bull Music Publishing, running the urban side of things there, essentially, and starting to change the way all of those things were organized. And they had started to think through moving some of those pieces over to the culture side, which is more of a marketing piece. And so while those conversations were happening, Billy was having some really strong conversations with Warner around doing some label stuff. And then lockdown hit, and we were still in all those conversations looking to see what we were going to do. And, for Billy and I, it was like, there's like a kind of, I guess the best way to phrase it is come to Jesus moment. It's like you're in lockdown, you're in the house all day. I know it's probably a little different for you guys, maybe down in North Carolina, but here in New York is a pretty serious thing. And people weren't going anywhere, doing anything, staying in the house. So starting a record label during that time was an interesting experience, but doing it with one of your best friends was amazing. Billy he has so much to do with my career, my trajectory. He's like one of my people, and for him especially, and then I always give my wife a ton of credit. It's like, it's what kind of made me who I am today. So, the opportunity to continue to work with him during COVID and start something with him was a no-brainer. And it's funny because we were kicking around names for a long time. And he had opportunity to go speak with Julie Greenwald. And we were bouncing names around. We had an initial name because we had a management company at the time together. And we thought about just kind of keeping everything succinct and having that name kind of be the name of the record company. And she was like, that's pretty unsexy, And it was said, so we kind of got sent back to the drawing board. And, the Icons part, Icons and Giants, it felt larger than life. It felt like us at that point in time, and what our goals were and what we wanted to achieve and still want to achieve. I think from a music perspective, from an ideological perspective as well. But, it stuck, and then we were off to the races and, corporate papers and lawyers and all that fun stuff. And, got a chance to, put pen to paper, do that deal with Warner and jump in the water and start working.
What are your roles in the company? Because again, I've seen you on LinkedIn, I know, and I've read your bio and stuff, but you've got a lot of roles. Can you kind of explain a little bit of each one and how they work?
Well, I mean, it's funny because I always feel like in a professional world, when someone sits down, they're like, I'm the head of product this and administrative lead to this. All of those things are very fancy ways of really thinking through from a talent perspective, who we're excited about, and then from an execution perspective, how to get the audience to turn their eyes towards them, amongst, whatever Drake record came out and whatever Secession finale is coming on. And I think that's, generally speaking, I think for so many people, when they're kind of studying the game, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. But the reality is, we're in an attention economy right now. And so for a lot of artists, labels, it's all the same hustle. It's the goal is to get people to pay attention. And I think, the reality is, Billy, I mean, and I'll sing his praise just because Billy, if you don't know who Billy Mann is, he's like longtime executive, longtime songwriter, Pink, Sting, Cher, Kelly Rowland, David Guetta. I mean, you can roll a bunch of names. He's touched it. He's won Grammys for it. He's produced the hit. He's written the hit. He's exec the hit. You know what I mean? And so with him, I think, his ears are so attuned and have been attuned for a long time to like what's going on, where that melodic earworm is, and like, what we can sit in the market. You know what I mean? And so that's really, it's a lot less major label, 17 departments meeting on Friday kind of thing. It's way more, Billy I and a cup of coffee or a Zoom or something, kind of like playing a few things and really kind of walking through, what we're excited about. And I think that that's the best way to kind of describe that. It's like, there's because of the digital age, there's never a lack of talent to discuss or look through. But I do think that how to get that to the masses, what's going to have a moment, that's the game. And so it is far the roles that I play at Icons and Giants are far less sexy than the corporate descriptions um, that dress them up, for lack of a better term. Yeah.
Yeah, because it seems like you're doing label and publishing and probably seven other things all at once. And do you have to roll those things together? Do you have like delegation? How big is your team?
I mean, that's the case, right? So having a team helps everything. We have an assistant, Eliza Barson, and she's amazing. And we work with Eric McClellan for a long time, and he was great. Emily Whitman, who long time exec in and out of a lot of different places on the record side and the marketing side, was in and out to really help us. And having a team is pretty crucial for us, or we couldn't really do that at a high level. So, that and a host of other third parties, whether it's people doing mixes, masters, Atmos masters, third party marketing coordinators. I mean, we live in an age of niche and expertise, and I think that we've had a lot of those people come across and help us as we've gotten some things off the ground. And then I think Billy and I's past history of just working closely with artists, producers, both domestically and internationally, and the relationships that have come along with that are a big part of that as well.
So getting kind of down into how you all are working, I know you're working with the artist Black Bach. How did you guys come across him? And generally speaking, how do you find the artists that you want to work with? What sort of criteria do you look at when you bring an artist on board?
Yeah. So Black Bach specifically, he lockdown happened. He was in Vegas. He had gotten a hold of Seth Godin's book on his downtime, and I forget specifically which one, but he essentially started working on something that he was passionate about in the neoclassical space. And when Billy and I got a chance to hear it, it's different, right? You're talking about an artist who is doing, piano music, neoclassical piano music, a black artist in the classical space who also paints his fingernails and writes songs about Michelle Obama's first day at the White House. And this is like, all of this for us felt like a real moment. Um, the George Floyd thing happened, and for us, it was kind of like, all right, we wanted to do that. You know what I mean? Like we've, over the years, we've been a part of some of the bigger musical moments, Drake, Justin Bieber, Beyonce, all of those, whether it's songwriters that we worked across or producers or whatever. But this was different. And, COVID, I think, did us all a favor and gave us a moment to like kind of be a bit introspective and look at what we were doing. And it felt like Bach was a thing that the world needed, and that felt really important, and it felt really good to support. And it's still, when he had his Today Show moment and the kind of windfall from that, and still the kind of audience that continues to grow around him. Um, it is one of those things that is a pleasure to invest in and be partners with, and watch it do something in music that a lot of people aren't doing. And that kind of thing really gets Billy and I excited. That's, where we love the dark horse for sure. So that for us would meant the world and still does.
That's really cool because having neoclassical piano players from any background is a rare thing for people at your level to be investing in and to be supporting. So, is that something that you were looking for, or you just happened upon him? Like, how do you find the people you want to work with? What was it about him?
Well, I think most of it in our business, I mean, I'm sure it's like relationships, right? So Bach's real name is Charlie Wilson, and Charlie and Billy had a history of working together dating back quite some time. And he had worked co-produced on a few projects that we were managing over the years. And so, when he started finishing the Black Book, it was something that he sent to Billy just to get his eyes and ears on. Billy loved it, shared it with me. I loved it. And it just felt, I don't know if you remember that George Floyd period, but it was just like a timing, um, it was a timing thing. And if the planet was open to so many more versions of a Black story than it ever had been, you know what I mean? And and has stayed open, you know what I mean? And so that for us just was really cool. But the other piece to it is, like, if you kind of go down the rabbit hole and look at who Black Bach is, there is a character human there. This isn't just like someone who's like, doing this, but deep down is like, violently narcissistic, or just like an unpleasant person to be around. Is a very easy person to be around, root for, and invest in. And so that had a lot to do with it, and it has a lot to do with it for me, especially in music. When you want to work close with someone. I've worked next to some people who are great and tough, and I've worked next to people who were not great and really tough, and everything in between. And so for me, I don't know, I'm a big person of, I want to be a person of character. I want to be around people of character. So that resonated with both Billy and I, and that was an easy pickup. And I mean, it's been a great ride. He is um, continuing to become more and more successful and gain audience. And it's not a surprise to us. It seems to be to everybody else, but not to us.
Yeah. Um, so I know you're also working with Cato on the track. Can you talk about how you guys became partner and what it's like to work next to somebody who's super successful in music and content?
It's funny. So Kato and I have like this very weird kind of genesis to it. Like, he grew up in the DMV, but he went to a few semesters of college in Philly. I grew up in Philly, and then ended up moving south. We met in Atlanta when I was on the first trip with a producer I had signed named Super Mario. And Super Mario's, at the time, he was just starting. He was driving to Atlanta from South Carolina. Um, and he was going on literally his first kind of big run after signing a publishing deal in Atlanta. And so we were at Mean Street with Drama and Canon, and he was still pitching Uzi records. Like, this is before, all the 300 productions that he had wrote for Uzi to land a few that were on his big record over COVID, or his big album over COVID, excuse me. But I was on an initial trip with Mario. Someone was like, "You got to link with Kato. I think you guys would get along." We got in the same room, and it wasn't like this kind of like, magic, starry eyed, it was meant to be thing. He was cool. I listened to some beats, really liked him. He and I spoke a bit, exchanged information, and I went back to New York, and he just kind of continued to work in Atlanta. And then, we had kept in touch, a couple other Atlanta trips. Every time I come to Atlanta, I'd hit him up. We'd grab a bite, chat life, listen to some records, and nothing happened. And then during COVID, I started to see some of his activity on social media. Like, he was killing the game. And so I hit him up. I was like, man, you know, super impressive what you're doing social media wise. And excuse me. And it felt genuine. It felt um, consistent. And I was like, congratulations. And he was like, thanks. We kind of chatted it up. And I was like, man, there's more business to be done here. Do like why don't we work together? If I bring you stuff, cool. We do some more work. If I don't, no harm, no foul. I just, it's COVID. I'm sitting in a chair, you know what I mean? Like listening to demos and exactly. And so it was pretty cool because um, he was like, cool, man, let's do it. And, since then it's been a list of things working with some of, the biggest companies on different branding opportunities in regards to social media, in regards to his tour. He at the time was not on TikTok, and TikTok was a bit young. I think, I mean, I'm saying this is 3 years ago, but, artists were still trying to wrap their head around what it was, how to use it. Um, and at the time, Billy and I were um, advising on the D'Amelios, like Dixie and Charlie. And Billy had written a hit for Dixie, and that was taking off, and there was like a lot of success there. And I was like, you should probably do something on TikTok. And he was like, I don't get it. I don't dance. Like, don't want to do it. And I had to talk him into it. And I will give him a lot of credit because one thing Cato is going to do is study. The second thing he's going to do is figure out how he can authentically execute. And then third, he's going to be consistent. That is his deal. That is how he has built a real business for himself. And so that's exactly what he did. Months later, I was on a ride home from North Carolina with my wife, and he calls me and he's like, hey, man, I think this song's kind of taken off on TikTok. Like, I don't know, but like the girl wants to talk to us. And what had happened is he had posted a piece of production that people were duetting. A girl in Australia duetted a piece and put it out as a sound. And this was everywhere. And initially, it was used by like, I want to say like Nikita. And then there was one more like kind of big influencer that had done some kind of like really simple, user generated video to this. And it was taken off. And first we talked to Rihanna Maria directly. Then the next time we talked to her was with her manager. Then she had a lawyer, and then labels were calling us, and it was insanity. But it's just another kind of tribute to Cato and his work ethic and his consistency because he was very much against being on TikTok, and then the bidding war and all the other things around that record, and several others over the course of the last 3 years. And, that's how he grew his business from where it was to where it is now. And, we finished a campaign with Kia. We worked with AT&T. We've done stuff for Walmart, Red Bull he's worked with. So there's just like a number of brands that he's done some pretty creative and innovative things with in the brand space, kind of using music and letting some of those brands kind of authentically touch, the hip hop space without feeling like, they're putting brand reputation at risk and being able to stay on message and things of that nature.
I've always wondered about that because, especially going back to you talking about George Floyd and how, culture, especially for Black culture, that changed the world in a lot of ways. And how, hip hop is such a mixture of culture and commerce. And I was just, I've been thinking about that a lot, where how do you kind of balance both of those things where you're trying to work through your community's needs to change and how to basically change the world, while also trying to maintain your, I guess, your authenticity while you're working the commerce side.
I mean, look, I think it's like any relationship, right? Like your relationship with your best friend is predicated on both of you guys having shared interests. Is predicated on communicating those interests clearly. And then once that kind of common ground is landed on, you guys, participate in events together or remotely around some of those shared interests. and because it's authentic and because it's like you guys have grown that relationship, it comes across as something that's very organic. And we live in, again, an attention kind of driven market, and so there are ways that I've seen a lot of brands just try to get a message out, but use the wrong messenger, or really don't like know exactly how to foster that kind of relationship. The thing I'll say about Cato, Cato is a man of principle, and so if he likes a product, he's down to do it. If he uses a product, he's down to do it. If he's interested in something and someone comes to him and it feels like an authentic relationship and not just an exchange of goods and services, he's always willing to listen. And I think that's why I think for the most part we've had really great relationships with some of the brands and the agencies, because Cato's willing to say no. And I think that they kind of appreciate it when he's like, I don't have a daughter. Me, promoting the new Barbie doesn't make sense to me. I don't think this works for me, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, and that's just an example. But I think sometimes people have to know kind of what's authentically them. You know what I mean? And I think brands, I'll say this, and this has really kind of been a through line over my career, is really kind of being the mediator between kind of that like corporate space, that the corporate speak, KPIs and deliverables, et cetera, versus someone who's like an artist. You know what I mean? Because that's a different language, and you know when someone's goal is to have the masses love a song and feel a way, and someone else's goal is to drive sales and revenue of a product, that marriage can be very clunky unless people are really communicating and there's someone there to kind of mediate so everyone understands their goals properly and they can accomplish them and feel good about it after it's over. You know what I mean? So that's been the big role that I play for Cato. As long as he's into the product and willing to do the work, we've worked with some agencies and found some really cool common ground. And I think, for artists, it's really, them and their teams knowing what they wouldn't mind representing, knowing kind of who they are, and that's really important. And I don't know that it's emphasized enough, but really knowing who they are and what their goals are, and then what brands may align with some of that, and how that marriage is going to look, what the music is going to look like, or what it's for, or what the content's going to look like, or what it's for, and then the overall goal for the brand. Because if you get into something and the brand doesn't achieve its goal, you're not going to get a call back, and it's going to, there's an outward facing number, right? There's a number of views, whatever. And if it's not achieved well, that's also a signal to other brands that there might not necessarily be a pairing that's beneficial for them. So it's a tricky thing. It requires ambassadors and some people who know how to communicate and make sure that the conversations are productive, and also the project, if that makes sense.
That totally makes sense. It seems like a lot of your philosophy is to follow the people, and that the people you're working with is such an important piece when you talk about character and you talk about, setting up relationships properly. Uh, how do you how do you evaluate people that you've just first met, or people who want to approach you? Like, how do you make those decisions about what like who these people are and how would you want to work with them?
I am a gregarious, outgoing person by nature. It's kind of my programming. So meeting people and getting in relationship with them quickly is a pretty natural thing. But I think really trying to identify character, and if I want to work with them, understanding the talent level and then understanding the drive, because Billy and I have had a saying for a long time. It's I can't outwork you for something that's your goal. You know what I mean? And I love being in relationships with people, and I am because people gave me opportunities. Yes, I worked very hard, but there were people who are gatekeepers who gave me some really cool opportunities that I was able to take advantage of. And I always want to feel like I can be that person to someone else as well and give them an opportunity. But after there's an importance in the willingness to be able to do something once given the opportunity, and that kind of person can sometimes be hard to find. I think it's an interesting environment for it all, because I think in a good way there's like an emphasis on kind of balance and mental health and some of these things, but the reality is, balance um, in the micro is very, very hard to achieve. Balance in the macro has been the goal for me over a long period of time, because when I was in my 20s and my early 30s, I didn't have any balance. I was working all day, all night. Thank God I met my wife. I'm sure I'd be in terrible health now if she hadn't like really gotten me to help me dial in some things that kept me from, just poor health, both mentally and physically. But, once you have a goal, something you want to achieve, you've got to be willing to kind of sacrifice a bit to get there, and there are just times where you're gonna, I was managing an artist and he was releasing tickets in Europe and he was a big deal on social media, and if the tickets weren't available, German girls would weep, and I'm up at 2 a.m. trying to make sure that all this is happening and hadn't slept for 2 days, and you know what I mean, like, and all those things, and someone would say, man, you've got to balance your life. You got to make sure. And it's like, no, it's not time for that. It's like, and so I think that, you're kind of looking for people who are talented. Yes. And I think identifying talent in current age can be interesting because you're working through a lot of um, digital enhancements and um, um, great edits, right? Like if you can watch a video on Instagram or YouTube or something and be like, oh man, there's a lot of talent here, and then get up on it close and really see it for what it is. And it might not necessarily be what you viewed on your screen. And so that requires just time and getting to know someone. I am a very, I guess the best term is like a very slow dater these days. I want to see if we can work well together. These days I don't necessarily love um, signing contracts right away. Like, let's do some things, let's do some dating and see, after everybody's comfortable, who everyone is, because I think that's super important. But I'm super willing to start the conversations like all the time. Like I get a lot of DMs and emails and people wanting to, listen to demos and things. And there's a way to approach all that stuff. But the reality is I don't mind and love getting all of that. I've met some really cool people that way. I pause on getting directly involved from a business perspective until I feel like we know each other enough to know if the time investment and financial investment is going to be worth it.
That is a theme that I've heard a lot of times, especially talking with people who are managers or who have been managers, that a lot of artists will just jump right in and say, hey, check out my record. And, I want somebody to, would you be up for managing me after listening to the track once? Has that happened to you a lot in your career? Do you see that a lot? And do you have recommendations for people who think that way?
Oh, certainly. I mean, look, I was that person. Let's be clear. It's like when you don't know what you know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know, right? Like, I will never forget. I was in North Carolina, in Greensboro. I had written a tune with one of my best friends, who's now like a really amazingly successful rock producer out in LA, who I'm so proud of, and he's such a good friend of mine. But he and I had written this goofy song, and an executive up at Sony at the time loved it. My lawyer was like, I played this thing. He loves it. He wanted to meet you. I went to New York, and like in my mind, it's over. I've made it, whatever. I go meet His name's Jake Fain. He ended up becoming a real friend of mine, and he's an amazing executive. He's a really good person, and he liked the one song. Now, this is new for me, and I don't know much about publishing. So I walk into his office, and I'm like, what are we signing? When am I working on? When do I work with Lady Gaga or whatever? My expectation was, and he liked the song, and he was like, send me more. I sent him one more. Nothing ever happened of it, and for a short time, I was like, man, this is BS. Like, why isn't he? I'm obviously got the goods, and the reality is that that kind of thing takes time, and when you're talking about publishing, you're talking about catalogs and breadth of work and top liners versus producers, and the network of people you're working with and how to get cuts. I mean, that world is so tough, and so I'm it's funny. There's a lot of people that I run into that were bloggers when blogs were like the way you got your music out. And I would sit around for days and email people and send them records and want them to do stuff. And they remember me because I would send them emails, and I remember them because I still follow them on Twitter even after the whole kind of blog apocalypse is like kind of come and gone. And a lot of them are great people that had like a moment and were a gatekeeper for a moment. And I think one, you kind of have to keep you manage an expectation. It's like when people are busy, they're busy. They send you an email, your you get them at a certain time, or you get them right before they're about to pick their kid up from daycare, whatever the circumstances. Sometimes things stick, sometimes they don't. But I would say 90% of the time it's not personal. It's just the hustle of life, And so I always kind of suggest to people that they try to make it personal. Like, there was a message I got, I want to say maybe a couple weeks ago, and it was, someone just saying, "Hey, I took a second and watched some of your videos, and I really like who you are, and congratulations on your son. I didn't know if you ever listened to demos, and I would love to be able to just speak with someone, even if it's just once for a few minutes, just to kind of talk about it." And of course, I'm open to that because it wasn't just a blanket blast like, yo, I'm gonna change the world, check out my new single. It's like, oh yep, don't care, bye. You know what I mean? Like, and this feels like a use. I'm just a vehicle to playing with Drake or something, which is great, but I'm not interested in that. But I'm interested in knowing a human, making a connection, and if there's something there of worth, I'm down. If there's something not there of worth, but I think that you're a good person. A lot of times I think, especially in our business, Michael, there's a lot of people who are playing the wrong role. There's a lot of people who are artists who should be publishers, who should be in an admin role somewhere, who should, and they just don't know that those are things. And I was in the same position. I was lead singer of a fairly successful band and really wanted to be an artist, and properly kind of saw what my strengths were as I grew, and then took a much lesser role in New York just so I could learn, so I could pivot to have the kind of you know great successes over the past 10, 15 years that I've had. But it took me kind of pivoting. It took someone going, have you ever tried this, and me being open to it. And so I say that a lot. Everybody can't be an artist, everybody can't be a producer. Sometimes people want those things for different reasons other than really just being in love with the records, and that can really take you to a place where there's not a lot of fruit from all the work. And sometimes that's really just because you're playing the wrong role on the team, essentially.
Yeah, I've seen that. There's so many artists out there that do the leap, trying to just whack at the door and punch all the way through it with one hit. And it's just, there's very rarely a moment where that happens. I also like to see that you're focused on relationships.
Yeah. I was going to say, there's one relationship that has stuck out to me over the years. So I used to play in a band in North Carolina called the Urban Sophisticates. I, through the Cat's Cradle, met there's a band on tour called the Flowbots. At the time, they had a song called Bicycles, Handlebars, No Handlebars, managed by a guy named JJ Italiano at the time. Did not know him from Adam. Met him after the show. Gave us a lot of props on our show. Obviously, they did really well. They had a hit taken off. God, it was that song was a rocket ship, you know. And JJ and I got along. After the show, we go to a bar that's in the basement on Franklin Street. And I used to get the bartenders to give me wine glasses, but I would put Pabst Blue Ribbon in it and pretend it was like some kind of like delicacy. I don't, very strange. But JJ and I drank and spoke and drank and spoke. And to this day, you know, we still have a great relationship. You know, he went on to be an agent at the agency group. He runs big playlists at Spotify now. And I think a lot of times people miss why someone would want to do you a favor or work with you. And it's if they genuinely like you as a human. You know what I mean? Like, um, and I have so many of those people that I befriended before they were anything. We were all just a bunch of like goofy kids trying to, you know, change the world and, you know, be millionaires or whatever. But we really just love what we did. And that's what we did, you know. And I think sometimes people can, you know, reach out and want someone to manage them or want someone to sign them. And they don't really bother to think about who the human is or want to connect with the human. And that's probably where you get the least amount of traction. You know what I mean? It's like I used to have a theory about bass players because a long time ago, I used to be security at a club and I would watch people try to befriend the front man to get like free tickets and, you know, being cool with the band. And I was like, you guys are doing this for like the bass player is by himself in the corner. He has the same guest list spot that everybody else does. And you guys ignore him. And I would always make friends with the bass player. So I could go to, I've never paid for a show for decade and a half because I knew all the bass players. And I say that to people. Sometimes they're looking in the wrong place for the wrong kind of person, you know, especially in this kind of attention economy for whoever is the most popular or coming into their feed of people on Instagram. You know, you might want to know the person who reads those DMs because a lot of times those people don't handle their own social media. Someone else may, and that's the person you want to know because that's the person no one else knows who can actually get you the interview or the meeting at the label and things of that nature. And so, you know, that's just a thought. That's something, a moniker I lived by for a long time and it served me well. But I think, you know, people should adjust maybe the kind of people they want to approach and the motivation behind why they want to approach them.
So switching the channel a little bit, you've worked in publishing a great deal lately, and we've got a lot of artists who are in our audience. Could you talk a little bit just about how publishing works in your world? Because I know there's a lot of artists out there who they might think that, you know, I'm signed to BMI, I've got a publisher. Could you give a little overview of publishing and then even more importantly, like how do you approach publishing?
Yeah, I mean, look, publishing is a very big world. And to be honest, when I first started, let's see, I first started with Green and Bloom BMG. That was 2014. It's changed probably tenfold since then. I think because there's so much new music and because the DSPs can be so dominant, but you know, it's really if you're going to make amazing money in publishing, then you either one are getting radio cuts or two you are doing sync and license. I think, you know, sometimes people are like, you know, I got a song with Drake. Well, if it's like, you know, off of a Drake mixtape from 15 years ago, it didn't stream much. Those checks are minuscule. You're one of three producers on the record, which means you have 10% of it. There's not going to be much in the way of revenue there. And I always try to taper people's expectations because first they find out about publishing, then they find out they got a cut of something that has publishing, and then the expectation is that they have an influx of revenue, and that's generally not the way it works. It always takes time. There's, the one story that I love that I'm most proud now, maybe not most proud of, because I've signed some really, really amazing people over the years, but um, this kid named John Norris goes by Trey Tracks from Long Island. Um, introduced to him via a friend of mine, goes by City Under Siege, real name Stanley Atwater, lives out in LA, comes from the Atlanta scene. Amazing respect. If you don't know about City, you should look him up. He is like quietly one of those guys, like one of those amazing humans, special humans that has like this raspy voice. Ah, yo, Ben was guy. He's like that. He's like a character in like an amazing sitcom, except he's a great human, and he had introduced me to Trey, and I signed Trey. It's funny, like Billy and I's relationship for a long time was me talking him into something that was a terrible idea, that half the time was a terrible idea and the other half made us some money. And so it was like I kept earning the right to talk him into something new. But, Trey was 18. He had just produced like a tenth of a hit. It was this record called Juice by Lil Donald in Atlanta that had like a moment. And Trey was about that life. Like I knew it. Like he was gonna be in the studio. He was gonna sleep in the studio. I was like, we're gonna do this deal. And it wasn't a crazy big deal, but we held on to him and we kept investing in him. And I mean, this kid, the last 3 years has been a wrecking ball as a producer. But it's really because he stayed in the game. He built the relationships with the artists, and there's a difference in today's world, especially on the hip hop side, between a beat maker and a producer. Trey is a producer in a classic sense. Trey can be in a session. Trey can call out energy in a song. Trey can like direct a vocal and really kind of touch with an artist. They trust him, and then they like do the kind of work that puts out way better than average albums or songs. Let me put it like that. So he's one of those guys that can get in the room with an artist because he's been in the room with artists, and he's been in the room with artists from inception, not just when they had the biggest song in the world. Now he wants to be in with them. And that's, there's so much strategy and honestly humility from producers working early on in their career, especially on the hip hop side, taking the time to work with artists who are not big but are driven. And Trey did that. I guarantee you 70% of the artists he worked with never did anything, but the 30% that did over time put him in a position to where he is now. And I'm super proud of him. He's phenomenally talented, plays keys, like understands chord structure, not just like, oh, I got a loop, like understands arrangement, talented DJ. But long story short, when it comes to publishing, those are the kind of things I'm looking for. Like not just someone who's got like a dope record that's moving, but someone who's going to continue to touch the artist because it's going to continue to um, breed more opportunities. You know what I mean? Like when you introduce someone to, when I introduced Trey um, to a lawyer in Atlanta. It was someone he kept up with. He didn't just get on the phone call, I'm Trey, I'm going to be the biggest producer in the world, and then nothing. You know what I mean? He knew how to keep in touch. He knew how to make that a part of his network. And as his network grew, people would come back to him for stuff. And that's, that's all relationships. I mean, publishing is, especially on the A&R side, it's all relationship based. It's who do you know? Can you put them in the room? Are people willing to do the work? Because a lot of times, I mean, being a songwriter producer is very unsexy. It's a lot of sessions that lead to nothing. It's a lot of songs that get cataloged somewhere that no one ever hears. No one really loves that life. You have to like love making records, and you have to love most of the time being disappointed. And that is not a life that people want. They want to be on Instagram at the Grammys, red carpet, in some very expensive clothes, thanking their mama. That's what they want. And it just takes a long time to get there, And so to answer your question a bit more specifically, Publishing is getting paid for the idea of the song. There's your traditional kind of like top liner people that like direct either vocal, melody, or lyric. Then there's the producer, that or producers plural these days. Someone who's either contributed to the arrangement or the actual production of the song. Help put it together. However those splits are done, you get a percentage of that, and then ASCAP and BMI help you collect public performance. But when you're really trying to collect from the labels, a publisher helps you do that. Someone like me helps you know more people so you can have more opportunities, get into sessions, meet new writers, and kind of like put together your network of, writing hit records, meeting artists, trying to get songs cut with artists. And that's really, that was the crazy time for me. We signed Super Mario early on. He was killing the game with Young Thug, and I knew the minute I heard him, because of the way he understood arrangement, the way he understood tone, like his aesthetic in a beat was not just like loop, drums, 808. It was like the songs grew. There was like brief pauses before choruses, and the way intro started told a story in and of itself. It was like special, and he's still special. I always tell people I from Gate knew Super Mario was going to be one of the top 5 producers in the game, and the last few years he went on a run, and it was like hit after hit, big artist after big artist. It was insane, but it wasn't a surprise to me because he always had that in him. He was a church musician, and I love finding those people because there is a specific kind of ear that a black church musician from a black church develops. Or, I mean, I don't know a ton of them, but a white musician from a church, from a black church. But it's like black church music is a different animal. The way you approach changes and things is different. And those musicians are always, to me, top flight. Go to any Jay-Z, Rihanna, anybody, guarantee you the drummer came from church, bass player came from church, probably the keys player came from church. Like, all of those top flight guys came from a black church somewhere.
Yes, I have seen that, and I am always in awe of that.
Yeah, because they pride themselves off of being that level of musician, about hearing a chord.
Yeah, and they start so young.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, that's the other bit. I recorded a gospel group in Pittsburgh, California, and the drummer was 5 years old. His feet could barely touch the kick drum, and he was crushing it better than any drummer I had seen in the last 7-8 years on tour. Like, he was just phenomenal for a 5-year-old. So I'm sure by now he's on tour with Beyonce or something.
Yeah, 100%.
It's a cultural thing that I don't think you see it anywhere else in the world.
No, but it's the intelligence behind not just being able to play the instrument at the high level, but how to spiritually move people with the play, right? Like, this isn't just a jazz kind of thing, right? Like there's a pastor. He is basically the lead singer. He is orchestrating a crowd. His inflection is rising or falling, and the way people are playing are, helping lay the foundation for what the environment's going to be, and it gets people riled up. It gets them calmed down. Like, there's a whole dynamic there that I think people have, I don't know, I think most people have missed over the course of the last 50, 80 years. I mean, however long people have been in church playing gospel music. I mean, that's historical. It's very American.
Yeah, and amazing, and just such powerful music that has influenced pretty much American culture since recordings started.
1,000%.
I know we have just a little bit of time left here because I know you have multiple recordings today that you're doing.
I do. I did that to myself. I'm going to regret it.
I kind of want to get a little bit just into your personal philosophy, because I hear you speak, and we're good friends with some of the same people, and I've known of you, just as someone who's kind of a man of faith and also very principled. And in this conversation, it's totally clear. I'm curious, like, how do you develop just kind of your daily work life? Like, what's your daily routine just to kind of keep going and staying positive the way that you do?
I mean, so it is a good question. The answer is I am as flawed of a human as anyone, right? So there is a really cool. I listen to a podcast that Questlove does, and it's really inspiring for me because it's always some, Quest is so meticulously intricate with understanding people's stories, and he's so intelligent and has such a broad knowledge of music. And I mean, the guy watches old episodes of Soul Train. It's like insane. But when I think about certain people, I think about what their strengths are, and it's really about how they're programmed. And I think so much of who I am is programmed by really good parents and just understanding like my legacy and what part of the story that I play, right? So like my grandmother was one of the first is either one of the first or the first black owned businesses in Greensboro, North Carolina. This is circa 1950 something with my grandfather, and she talked about how she had to get her white neighbors to borrow money from the bank, and they both charged them interest, and how hard they had to work to pay all that off and start the company. And when you fast forward to when Billy went initially over to Red Bull and created the publishing company and brought me on the urban genre side, and I end up in Austria walking through publishing and some of the new songs we have coming with all kinds of the biggest artists. It's like the length of time between my grandmother asking for the loan to that is not lost on me. You know what I mean? Like, and so my brain kind of knows that it's not just me. And I think a lot of it has to do with my parents and the way I was raised, and things that stayed important to me, and then the people in my life that continue to give me opportunities. And it's funny, I struggle with the faith conversation now, just because this will sound how it sounds, but my over the course of the last 8 years, I've struggled with how much I trust the evangelical community with a moral statement overall, when it's like it seems like it shifts between moral statements and political statements, and that feels disingenuous to me. But the reality about that, I don't think my life is an accident, and that there are certain things that feel like so ordered and good to me. It's just that I would still always kind of say I'm a person of faith. For me, it's the articulation that kind of it's new. It's a nuanced conversation that we could have over large amounts of alcohol at some other point in time. But I think for me, character is just important, and it stayed important because it was pushed in a way that didn't feel heavy-handed. It felt guiding, and I stayed to those principles, and it brought me to an amazing place. When I treat people the way I want to be treated, I do more business with them. When I treat people like I want to be treated, we end up in good relationships. When I identify qualities in people that I think are really special, good things come of it. And some of that sounds so simple, but I think I always just get excited about good people, and it was like the best um, guide. It was the best North Star that I've had, and yes, I my daily routine, I get up at 4:45 in the morning, and I try to work out, and I try to gain perspective on a day, and then I get my son up and feed him and spend some time with him, and then jump into work. And try to be creative, and some days I'm more creative than not, and then I try to address a million emails and all those other things. But I think so much of the day for me is more encompassed in being grateful for the day than it is the habit schedule of it, because our time is, people can take for granted their time on the planet, and we will all end at some point. And so my appreciation for my day, sometimes it's a great use of time, and I, you know, have it scheduled and blocked. And sometimes at lunch I go swim in the pool. Like, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to put out, I don't have this. There's some people in the world who work amazingly hard. I always think about the idea of work. Like, my grandfather on my father's side, worked in a factory. I work, I sit in front of a computer and push buttons and then think of cool things and try and then make them. Do you know what I mean? Like, I want to keep that perspective. And I think that kind of helps me move through my days and feel like I value them correctly, and maybe feel like, excuse me, other people can be inspired by that mentality. That's a lot of talking, but that's the best way I can articulate it.
It's also really inspiring. I think that being able to approach where you've got both a place of privilege and also a place of great humility, and your ancestors and everything. That's a really sweet spot to be in, because it's not all that common. A lot of people of privilege sort of take a lot of it for granted and don't even know they have it, which you clearly are past that.
Well, I think that's very American. I think Americans can get really, right now, America feels sometimes like it's in a competition on who has it the worst. And I've been to some places in the world that have it pretty bad, and so I sometimes try to caution people in their cultural haste to make sure they are in touch with their trauma, to sometimes remember things are pretty good. You know what I mean? Like, to really think through, like, some of the great things. And I know some people have gone through some really terrible things, but for the most part here in the States, we got it good.
Do you have any advice to aspiring artists that you can give? If you're starting out here, what are some of the best things you can do?
I mean, look, the internet is full of life hacks, music hacks, hacks. You know, information comes free. There's a YouTube channel that'll tell you exactly how to make a record, how to steal the software, whatever. And so, my brain never offers that advice, because I don't know. Those are all like steps, right? Anyone can do the steps. But I always say, move me. Move me with the music. Tell me a story. Chat GPT didn't have a father that died early. No one but you has your parents, your brothers and sisters, or lack thereof. Your experience in a cultural space did not move from one city to the other. Whatever you're going through and whatever is universal is the story to tell. And be real with that, be authentic with that, and make something excellent. There are hundreds of thousands of new songs that come out a week. I will tell you that 98% of them are terrible. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, one, people are making songs to make songs and not making songs to say a thing. You know what I mean? Like, with their soul, and as corny as it'll sound, when you do something authentic, that vibration, I think, touches people different. And, it touches me different. And so that's when I get excited about a record, or that's when I feel something. That's when I want to talk to someone, because it made me feel something. And sometimes those people don't necessarily go on to be the biggest stars. Like, sometimes they go on to be great executives. Sometimes they end up being teachers. I don't know. But I will say, out of all the information and advice and everything, if you're not committed to making something that people can feel and making it at a high level, then you are doing it for a hobby, and that's okay. But, like, that's my advice, is to move someone, move groups of people to feeling. And I think that that resonates more than um, just the practice of doing something and trying to get somewhere without something to say. I think ultimately, if you move people, that you'll notice the difference in the way you attract audience and the way people want to listen to what you have to say.
That is excellent advice. Well, Benton, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a huge pleasure talking to you and learning more about your work, and I hope we can have another one of these conversations again.
Yeah, let's do it over Eagle Rare. I don't know if you're a drinking man, but let's do it over some very nice bourbon somewhere in the South with time on our hands for sure.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, feel free to send me an email at hello@artistmanagers.io. We'd love to hear from you. We'll see you next time. Thanks.